For decades, fear gripped communities as one man evaded capture. His presence was like a dark cloud casting a shadow over the lives of many. People whispered his name in hushed tones, afraid that even speaking it might summon him. He was a master of disguise, blending into the night, becoming one with the darkness. His movements were calculated, his actions deliberate, leaving no trace behind. The fear he instilled was palpable, a constant reminder of the evil that lurked just out of sight. He was a phantom, a shadow, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. Each crime scene was a puzzle, a macabre masterpiece that left investigators baffled. The brutality of his actions was matched only by the cunning with which he executed them. He seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only the echoes of his victims' screams. The communities he terrorized were left in a state of perpetual fear, always looking over their shoulders, never knowing when he might strike again. His name was Earle Leonard Nelson, but the world would come to know him as the Gorilla Man. Born into a world of chaos and violence, Nelson's early life was a harbinger of the horrors to come. His childhood was marked by tragedy and instability, shaping him into the monster he would become. As he grew older, his violent tendencies became more pronounced, culminating in a series of brutal murders that would earn him his infamous nickname. The Gorilla Man was not just a killer, he was a symbol of the darkest aspects of human nature. He preyed on the innocent, their trust shattered by his cold-blooded acts. His victims were often those who least expected it, lured into a false sense of security by his seemingly benign demeanor. Once he had gained their trust, he would strike with a ferocity that left no room for escape. The aftermath of his attacks was a grim testament to his ruthlessness, with each crime scene more horrifying than the last. The communities he targeted were left to pick up the pieces, their sense of safety forever shattered. This is the story of his reign of terror, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. It is a tale of fear and survival, of communities brought to their knees by a single man's insatiable thirst for violence. The legacy of the Gorilla Man is one of pain and suffering, a stark reminder of the fragility of human life. As we delve into his story, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that monsters are not just the stuff of nightmares, they can walk among us, hidden in plain sight. Nelson's story is not for the faint of heart. It is a journey into the depths of human depravity, a descent into a world where morality is but a distant memory. His actions were driven by a darkness that defies comprehension, a malevolence that seemed to know no bounds. As we explore the twisted mind of Earle Leonard Nelson, we are reminded of the thin line that separates sanity from madness, and the terrifying potential for evil that exists within us all. It is a descent into the abyss of the human soul, a journey into the mind of a monster. The Gorilla Man's reign of terror is a stark illustration of the capacity for cruelty that lies within the human heart. His story forces us to confront our own fears, to question the nature of evil and the limits of human empathy. As we navigate the dark corridors of his psyche, we are left to ponder the age-old question: what drives a person to commit such heinous acts? The answers may be as elusive as the man himself, but the search for understanding is a journey worth undertaking. His crimes shocked a nation, leaving an indelible mark on the American psyche. The Gorilla Man's legacy is one of fear and fascination, a dark chapter in the annals of criminal history. His story serves as a grim reminder of the capacity for evil that exists within us all, and the importance of vigilance in the face of such darkness. As we close this chapter, we are left with a haunting question: how many more like him are out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike? Earle's life was marked by tragedy from the start. Born in 1897, he suffered a horrific accident at the age of 7. A streetcar accident left him in a coma, his skull fractured, a harbinger of the darkness to come. Though he recovered, his behavior grew erratic, his mental state fragile. He developed an obsession with religion, quoting scripture while exhibiting disturbing tendencies. He peeped into windows, his voyeurism a precursor to the horrors he would later inflict. His troubled childhood, a breeding ground for instability, set the stage for a life of violence. Nelson's crimes were as calculated as they were brutal. He targeted landladies, women he perceived as vulnerable, gaining their trust before striking. His weapon of choice, strangulation, his powerful hands silencing his victims. After the deed, a horrifying ritual. He would defile their corpses, posing them in grotesque positions, a final act of domination. His crimes were not merely about taking a life, they were about exerting power over the vulnerable, a chilling display of depravity. San Francisco in 1926 became the first to tremble before Nelson's brutality. Clara Newman, a kind-hearted landlady, opened her door to him, unaware of the monster she invited in. Her kindness was repaid with unimaginable cruelty. He strangled her, his powerful hands silencing her pleas for mercy. Her lifeless body posed in a grotesque tableau was a horrifying discovery for the police. Little did they know it was just the beginning of a gruesome journey across America. Nelson, emboldened by his dark success, was ready to spread his terror far and wide. Section 5. A Trail of Blood Across the West. From San Francisco, Nelson's trail of terror snaked its way across the American West. His journey was not just a physical one, but a dark odyssey through the hearts of unsuspecting communities. Each town he visited became an unwitting chapter in his gruesome saga, a place where normalcy was shattered by his presence. The vast landscapes of the West, with their open roads and small, tight-knit communities, provided the perfect backdrop for his sinister activities. As he moved, he left behind a wake of fear and confusion, a ghostly figure whose name would soon be etched in infamy. He drifted from town to town, assuming aliases, a phantom blending into the fabric of everyday life. Nelson was a master of disguise, his ability to adapt and change his persona, making him nearly invisible to those around him. In one town he might be a traveling salesman, in another, a drifter looking for work. His chameleon-like nature allowed him to slip through the cracks of society, unnoticed, until it was too late. The small towns of the West, with their trusting and close-knit communities, were easy prey for his deceptive charm. His victims, often landladies or housekeepers, were unsuspecting, their trust tragically misplaced. These women who opened their homes and hearts to him saw only a man in need, not the monster lurking beneath the surface. Nelson's ability to feign vulnerability and neediness was his most potent weapon. He exploited the kindness of these women, turning their compassion into a deadly trap. Each encounter began with a smile and a handshake, but ended in unimaginable horror. Each murder followed a chillingly familiar pattern. Nelson would gain entry into the home, often under the guise of needing a place to stay or offering to do odd jobs. Once inside, he would bide his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The homes, which should have been sanctuaries of safety, became scenes of terror. The pattern was so consistent that it became a grim signature, a calling card that law enforcement would come to recognize all too well. He would charm his way into their lives, offering sob stories to elicit sympathy. Nelson's tales of woe were convincing, his demeanor disarming. He spoke of hardships and misfortunes, weaving stories that tugged at the heartstrings of his victims. His charm was his camouflage, hiding the predator within. The women, moved by his plight, would offer him food, shelter, and sometimes even money, never suspecting the true danger they were inviting into their homes. Once inside, he would unleash his brutality, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. The violence of his attacks was shocking, a stark contrast to the gentle persona he had presented. The aftermath of his crimes left communities reeling, struggling to comprehend the savagery that had invaded their peaceful lives. Police and neighbors would arrive to find scenes of chaos and bloodshed, the tranquility of their towns shattered. The body count rose, and with it, the fear that gripped the nation. Newspapers across the country carried headlines of the gruesome murders, spreading panic far and wide. Communities that had once felt safe and secure were now gripped by fear, their sense of safety irrevocably damaged. The increasing number of grave markers stood as silent witnesses to the horror that had swept across the West. People gathered in fear, sharing stories and warnings, hoping to protect themselves from the unseen menace that was Nelson. By the summer of 1927, Nelson's reign of terror had reached the East Coast. He continued his gruesome spree, targeting unsuspecting women in Philadelphia, New York, and beyond. The press, hungry for a story, dubbed him the Gorilla Man, a moniker that played on the public's fear and fascination. His name, whispered in hushed tones, became synonymous with terror. Mothers clutched their children closer, landlords reinforced their locks. Nelson's shadow loomed large, a specter haunting the nation. But even as Nelson's reign of terror reached its peak, the net was closing in. Law enforcement, working tirelessly across state lines, began to piece together his movements. His pattern of targeting landladies, his MO, became their guide, his brutality their driving force. His face, plastered on wanted posters across the country, became a symbol of the hunt. The public, living in fear, became the eyes and ears of the investigation, eager to see the gorilla man brought to justice. In June 1927, Nelson's luck finally ran out. After years of evading the law, his criminal activities had finally caught up with him. The authorities had been on his trail for months, piecing together clues and following leads that spanned several states and provinces. Nelson, known for his cunning and ruthlessness, had always managed to stay one step ahead. But this time, his escape plan was foiled. He was apprehended in Winton, Manitoba, after a daring escape from a train transporting him to Winnipeg. The train had been heavily guarded, but Nelson, ever the opportunist, saw a chance and took it. He leaped from the moving train, hoping to disappear into the vast Canadian wilderness. However, the local police, alerted by the train guards, quickly mobilized and captured him before he could get far. He had murdered a young girl, the final act of a monster finally caught. This heinous crime shocked the community and galvanized law enforcement to intensify their efforts. The crime scene was meticulously examined, and the evidence pointed unmistakably to Nelson. The public, horrified by the brutality of the act, demanded swift justice. The newspapers were filled with lurid details, and the story spread like wildfire across the nation. His capture marked the end of a terrifying chapter in American history. For years, Nelson had been a specter haunting the dreams of many, his name synonymous with fear and violence. The relief was palpable as news of his arrest spread. People gathered outside courthouses and police stations, eager for updates and hoping for closure. The sense of collective relief was immense, as communities felt a heavy burden lifted from their shoulders. His trial was a media sensation, the nation transfixed by the man who had terrorized them for so long. Reporters from all over the country descended on the small town, their cameras and notebooks at the ready. Every detail of the trial was scrutinized, from the testimonies of witnesses to the presentation of evidence. The courtroom was packed every day, with people eager to see justice served. The trial was not just about Nelson, it was a reflection of a society grappling with its darkest fears. Found guilty of murder, Nelson was sentenced to death. The jury's decision was unanimous, and the judge's gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. There was a sense of grim satisfaction among the spectators, knowing that the man who had caused so much pain would finally face the ultimate punishment. The sentence was a clear message: such heinous acts would not go unpunished. On January 13, 1928, he was hanged at the Headingley Jail in Manitoba, his reign of terror finally at an end. The execution was witnessed by a somber crowd, many of whom had followed the case from the beginning. As the gallows loomed, there was a collective breath held, a moment of silence before justice was served. The chapter closed with a sense of finality, a dark period in history brought to a close. Earle Leonard Nelson's crimes left an indelible mark on the American psyche. He shattered the illusion of safety, reminding people that evil could lurk behind the most unassuming facades. His story became a cautionary tale, a warning whispered from generation to generation. The fear he instilled lingered long after his death, a chilling testament to the power of one man to terrorize a nation. His legacy serves as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of humanity, there is always hope for justice, and that even the most elusive monsters can be brought to light.